All right, we'll go ahead for formally get our session started. Again, my name is Aaron Rose. I'm the chair of the StarTides Advisory Board. Today's session should be quite interesting. This next session on agriculture and food security. Some of you know the story how I made a trip up to, for the first time, to Shepherdstown, West Virginia last year. I have a friend of mine and colleague that has lived in Shepherdstown for 20 some years. And when I first met him, he gave me a kind of a standing invitation to visit him. And for one reason or another, I never really took the time to do so. And then when I got re-engaged with StarTides a couple years ago, and at the urging of Dr. Lynn Wells, that invited Mary Hendricks, the president of Shepherd University, to be on our advisory board. They kind of reconnected me to Shepherdstown. And so with Shepherd University becoming a partner and engaged with StarTides, Mary Hendricks, President Hendricks, has been a very vocal advocate and supporter of Tabor Farm. And I had the chance to go up there twice last year. The first time was in June, and really didn't know what to expect. I know very little about agriculture. It's just an area that I know very little about, other than I'm a consumer of food. And so and I know the importance of food and agriculture to the economy, and particularly where I'm residing in California. I've driven down the Central Valley, and then I lived in Washington State for 25 years, and apples, pears, and cherries. I knew the importance of the ag industry there. But some of the vulnerabilities of the world really goes around food, agriculture, and food security. And so it's something that I've become more aware with. And when I made the trip up to Tabor Farm and met a couple of people that's going to be here today, that are here today, gave me some insights on an appreciation of things that are involved in ag, and really the not just me, but on a general basis, how uninformed people are, and not just in the United States, just globally, of where their food. We're candidly more guilty of it in the United States than other countries, of just our ignorance of what. Of our food systems. How's it grown? Where is it grown? How's it the logistics? And so I had a chance to really learn about from the, no pun intended, from the micro level at Tabor Farm and Shepherdstown, West Virginia. So I was very excited when we created today's program that was going to bring in people to really start this conversation around agriculture. And so I want to take an opportunity in advance to say thank you to my friends from Shepherd University. I'll introduce Dr. Jeff Groff, a professor of applied physics and chair of the Department of Environmental and Physical Sciences at Shepherd University. I'll let you, Professor, take it over from here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. See, I was off camera. So I'm gonna check in with Zoom and see how many 6 participants out there in the Zoom world. Great. All right. Well, thank you, Aaron, for the introduction and for inviting us here today. And also to Lynn Wells and all of StarTides for inviting us down here to GMU to be a part of this 16th StarTides demonstration, capabilities demonstration day. So Shepherd University's Tabor Farm is a property that is about a mile away from main campus. And about 6 years ago, my department decided which curates, my department being environmental and physical sciences, decided to start a program in sustainable food production. Agriculture is, in terms of sheer quantity of land area devoted to this activity, probably humanity's largest impact on the world, if you measure it that way, in land area devoted to an activity. Environmental studies is about understanding humans' interactions with the world. So agriculture needs to be a part of that study. Since then, there's been a lot of development at the farm, which started out basically as a blank slate to develop some infrastructure. And I'm going to show you a video montage of some drone footage in a little bit to set the stage for where all this work is happening at Shepherd. We've established the Shepherd University Agricultural Innovation Center, which is devoted to agricultural education and community outreach. And today I brought with me Dr. Brooke Comer. And Dr. Comer is a visiting assistant professor, soon to be assistant professor of environmental studies. And her background is in horticulture. And as I introduce each of the panelists here, I'm going to pause and allow them to say something about themselves. So Brooke.
So I have my PhD from Michigan State University in horticulture. My focus has been on vegetable production systems, and specifically I was looking at composting systems and always thinking about kind of circular design and keeping resources local as much as possible and increasing soil organic matter, which is a big part of what's at the crux of how to create resiliency in the face of climate change in the food system. You know, increase how much carbon is being pulled from the atmosphere, stored in the soil, and that's going to help in the face of more extreme weather events, water retention, nutrient retention, and a lot of the things that are being faced by farmers today. So that continues to be my focus, and now leading the sustainable food production concentration and some of the activities there at Taylor Farm.
Thank you. Next, I'll introduce Miss Madison Hale, who's sitting here to my right. Madison is the farm coordinator at Tabler Farm. Madison?
Hi, everyone. I have a BA in Global Studies with an environmental concentration, and I've been working at Tabler Farm now. This will be my third year, so roughly 2.5 years, and I've been tying in my background studies of the global system to apply that to our local system. One of my favorite slogan sayings, whatever you want to call it, is think globally, act locally. And I think that is exactly what we're trying to achieve here at Tabler Farm, building a localized, resilient food system to have a positive impact on the global food system at large.
Thanks, Madison. Next, Mr. Todd Coyle, who is Executive Director of Jefferson G.A.P Coalition.
All right, thank you. I have no degrees or anything in any of this. I've just been working at it for a long time. I've lived in Jefferson County my whole life. My family goes back there to the 1700s, and my dad was a ag teacher, and my family's been involved in agriculture in one form or another for most of that time. I was the artist in the family, but I did grow up working on farms, and in the long run became a person who helped farmers stay in business. So my main goal is to keep small farms and small businesses in the local economy and keep them viable. So as a part of that, our nonprofit runs the Charlestown Farmers Market and Bushel and Peck, a grocery store downtown in Charlestown. And we do other local economic initiatives, farm to school things, education. And we do what we can to keep local foods local.
Thank you, Todd. And last, Tania Johnson-Hester, who is, her title is Community Engagement Coordinator, and she works at Tabler Farm and is AmeriCorp employee.
Hello, my name is Tania Johnson-Hester. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator at Tabler Farm through AmeriCorp. So my goal is to get more community engagement in the farm, from getting more people to join the program, making sure the community knows that we're there, helping out with our relationships with food pantries to get more people access to healthy local foods. I'm originally from Southeast DC, so I'm not too far from here. And I am an Air Force veteran. I was in the Air Force for 6 years as a weather forecaster.
Thank you. And there was another individual mentioned on the program, Paul Wilmoth, and he couldn't be here with us today, but he's been involved with a lot of the work we've done at the farm, and is a farmer himself, a rancher, and he is a member of the Shepherd Farm Advisory Council. But yeah, he couldn't make it down here today. So I'm gonna show a video montage, this video montage of drone footage, and we'll narrate it over it while it's playing. But before we get in, and then I'd like to take questions from the audience first. I have a whole bunch of questions I can ask our panelists, but I'd like to start with questions from the audience. But before any of that, I thought I'd set the stage with a thought that I had this morning. This is related to, compare and contrasting energy, resilience, and sustainability. Pick on energy a little bit because it's fresh on my mind from the earlier panel. Just to give you an example of how resiliency and sustainability can often be counter to one another. One thing that can enhance resiliency may not be sustainable, and vice versa. And an example of that, just one example of it, would be many sustainable energy sources, green energy sources, have the problem of intermittency when it comes to solar energy and things like that. Intermittency is a problem that needs to be dealt with if you're trying to build resilient systems, where you're trying to satisfy both base load and also peaking demand in the energy grid. On the other hand, when it comes to food, I was thinking about this morning, many of the initiatives, many of the strategies, tactics, whatever you want to call it, that can lead to more sustainable agricultural practices can also lead to enhanced resiliency of these networks or of these systems, diversification, local networks, regenerative practices, soil health. All of these things can lead to more sustainable systems and also more resilient systems. And I think that we'll be talking a lot about this in our questions. All right. So I make sure to share the screen with the Zoomers out there. All right. So there's no sound. This is the Tabler Farm 2023 rough cut drone footage from last week, and I haven't had time to narrate over it or add music. So we will narrate as we go. So like I said earlier, the farm is about a mile from main campus, straight line distance, about a mile from main campus. It is 158 acres, split roughly equally between pasture and in forest. It was purchased by the university or acquired by the university in the 1990s, but the university didn't do much with it until about 6 years ago. So this is, that's the northern extent of the Blue Ridge Mountains there in the distance, looking east across the horizon. There are some old structures on this farm. We've tried to renovate some of these. There is an old farmhouse, stone farmhouse, which someday will be beautiful again when we get the resources to renovate it. Here you're seeing about several acres that are fenced in with deer exclosure fencing, a high tunnel greenhouse, outdoor crops. There's some raised beds. And I think I see Tania there. And that pavilion, which we also call our outdoor classroom. And right next to it, tucked behind it, is a refrigerated truck trailer that we're converting to cold storage. So out there right now, there's production in the high tunnel. There's outdoor crops in these fields in the deer exclosure. There's Madison started a native food forest. We have an orchard started. Here's some footage from last week in the high tunnel. So you can see the growing season started in the high tunnel weeks ago. Which is, it never stopped.
We grow year round in the high tunnel. That's the main purpose of them, is it allows you to extend your growing season.
What is it that you're growing?
Right now, we're highly diversified, so we grow just about every vegetable you can think of. This time of year, you can only grow things that are cold hardy. So we have a lot of greens like spinach and kale, lettuce. Those were all things that we planted in the fall, and we're slowly transitioning into spring. But the purpose is to demonstrate to students and community members, any other aspiring, farmers, what is possible within your land. So the fenced in area, which is deer fencing, which is essential for our region because deer are very highly populated. It's about a little over an acre, like an acre and a half. And you can do a lot in that small of a space. So that's kind of what we're highlighting there through a small orchard, diversified vegetables, some specialized fruit production, the native food forest, which is kind of bouncing off of some permaculture techniques and ideas, along with traditional indigenous techniques.
That's one of the things we hope to encourage with what we do in this, is to encourage people to grow.
Oh, I forgot about that.
What we hope to encourage is to encourage people to grow year round, so we can have these local foods. You can't get everything year round, but like I said, if you do it right, you can get certain crops year round. And if you have high tunnels, and what you guys are doing by doing this is teaching the community that this is possible.
Exactly. So that's an example of season extension. These are often called passive solar greenhouses. It's relatively low tech. It's something that people could easily do to enter into the farming world. And we've been hosting a series of workshops. The last one was specific to high tunnel growing and this kind of low technology that a lot of people are starting to adopt, where if we're talking about the local food system and really eating locally and eating in season, you're able to extend that season significantly, both on the front end and on the back end.
And there's a lot of this you can do in your own backyard. So you can have, if you're talking about healthy communities, which is our ultimate goal, or at least my ultimate goal, is to encourage farmers to grow like this, but also you as somebody in town who has a little space in the backyard to do something like that. And then you grow something maybe too much and then share it with your neighbors and so on and so on. So it's about creating a whole system and community around food and food growth.
In a minute, you'll see a shot of, and
What you're
yes,
seeing right now is students and students from different classes coming out, and some of them being exposed to farming for the first time. And then that diversity in the types of things that we're showing is really important.
See the nets, are you studying pollination and things like that too?
You're talking about the white cloth.
Yeah.
That is temperature control mostly. So one of the impacts of climate change on agriculture is the more increased fluctuation of temperatures. So I don't know if anyone else has noticed this spring, we've had a number of almost 90-degree days, which is not normal for the beginning of April. And so the crops that are in the ground right now are not tolerable to those temperatures. And so the white cover helps shade them and just give them a little bit of protection from that increased sun.
What are you doing at Tabor that's not being done elsewhere in eastern West Virginia?
well,
Teaching.
we got students here And something that makes the farm unique is this building right here is used to be a milking parlor for dairy cows, and we converted it to an aquaponics laboratory. So aquaponics combines growing fish in tanks with growing vegetables hydroponically. And so this is controlled environment agriculture. We rely on LED grow lights here. We got different types of hydroponic systems in play here. That went too fast. So these are, I call these Dutch buckets. They're a way that you can grow viney vegetables in this controlled environment. Things like tomatoes, peppers. These are cucumbers. And green leafy vegetables grow very well in these floating raft systems, which are also called deep water hydroponic beds. And we have two systems here, which are completely parallel but independently fed from effluent from two different tanks of fish. So this tank is tilapia, and then we have another tank that has bluegill in it. So we've set up these systems in parallel, with the exception of this one tank. It's shared by both systems. This is expanded clay pellets in a settling tank to remove solids from the system.
I'll also add, there's nothing new under the sun, right? So a lot of the practices that we're doing, it's not that they're not being done elsewhere. It's more like how we are incorporating that into our local system. So I think something that's unique about this program that sets us apart from like WVU, which has a whole school of agriculture, which we do not, is that we're focusing on the community side of the agricultural system. So we engage a lot with local growers and local community members who are really interested in this field, but don't have the training to pursue it themselves.
Are you doing anything with agrivoltaics that'll tie some of your interest in renewable energies plus our need in Caribbean for food sustainability?
Agrivoltaics.
Our agricultural farmland is now being occupied by solar panels.
Yeah, so the question was about agrivoltaics. We do have, as you can see here, a very small solar array at the farm. Agrivoltaics is something that I've pursued funding for unsuccessfully so far. But the challenge of, like you're describing, the challenge of agrivoltaics, it's a dual use type of strategy where you're producing energy from photovoltaics and some sort of agricultural production. It can be vegetable production, or it can be animal agriculture, some other agricultural production in the same space. And I think one of the major challenges to solar is I tend to be a promoter of rooftop solar because it doesn't take land away from other uses. But I think there is some potential for this type of dual use agrivoltaics. There's some, the challenges currently are, the racking equipment that you get for solar panels from off the shelf type components aren't designed with agrivoltaics in mind. The types of racking that work well for agrivoltaics are things like putting your panels on trellises and using bifacial panels, which have glass on both sides so sunlight can get through the panels to what's underneath. Using vertically mounted panels that catch solar energy in the morning and the late afternoon, but in the peak of the day, allow sun to hit rows of exposed ground to get down to your crops. So there's definitely, there needs to be some market development there for, agrivoltaics, at least in the United States. There's not much work not much commercially available when it comes to agrivoltaics yet. There's something else I was going to add, but now I forgot what it was.
And I'd say then that the agrivoltaics and the aquaponic systems, for example, the education side and really looking at the economics as well and how well it's going to end up working out in the research part of it too. Every place is a little bit different. You know, how well it's going to work in West Virginia might be a little bit different than how well it's going to work somewhere else. So nothing is that particularly different than, you know, no one else in the world is doing these things, but we're looking at the research side and the economic side as well.
And
one of the most things that I like about it is someone who's been in the county of my entire life and watched it from when I was a kid. Everything was farmland and orchards, and as it grew up, and all that kind of disappeared, and farms became smaller. And one thing I noticed too is that we're not. My microphone is going in now, but young people, we're not keeping up with it. And the thing that these guys do is keep young people involved and teaching moving forward. So that's one of the most important things to me, because as I'm getting older and I'm not going to do this forever. So people like Madison and Brooke, to me, are some of the most important things that we can grow here, is their minds to keep this going. So that someday I can go to a market and buy stuff and don't have to run it.
so, we'll take questions full time in a second. We'll finish the video here. The last flyover here is over a field along the main entrance to the farm, and we recently got a pretty substantial grant from congressional direct spending from our senators to build an agricultural small business incubator at the farm. And so this field in a few years will be laid out with plots, which will be used by beginning farmers to hone their craft and to get experience with markets and experience growing products. And we also we plan to build a building out here, a multi-use building, which will be part aggregator, part hopefully we'll be able to have some equipment installed that we can share with local producers to make value-added products, sort of in the spirit of tractor sharing, but sharing things like dehydrators and volatile compound extractors, oil extractors. So farmers who couldn't individually afford these types of things will have a place to go to make value-added products. So I'll end the video, and then those out in YouTube in Zoom land will see our faces again. And now we'll take questions.
Here's history about what the farm was prior, and then what was the university's intention when they purchased the farm, and then what kind of took place. Obviously, there was a big gap between purchase of the farm and then the development of the farm 6 years ago.
Yeah. So the question was about what was going on at the farm between 1990, when the university acquired it, and 2016, 17, when members of my department got bright ideas.
And why did the university acquire the farm?
So why did the university acquire the farm? I do not know the answer to that. That preceded my time at Shepherd.
From my understanding, it's a lot to do with the family that owned the land has deep connections with the university. And so it was kind of, they wanted to preserve the farmland, and they thought the best way to do that was to connect it with Shepherd University.
And typically the way this works in West Virginia is if Shepherd wants to acquire land, it's actually the state of West Virginia that buys it. and transfers it to Shepherd University. So the details of how that happened, I don't know, but I do know since that time, some of the things that happened at Tabor Farm, well, there were haying contracts with local farmers just to hay the land, which has left us with poor soil currently. A lot of nutrients have been taken away by that being done for many, many years. There was one or more individuals who would use the farm as their personal dump and would go out there and just, dump trash and put it in the buildings, the grain bins, all this stuff was just filled with trash. All of the buildings that you saw in that film were derelict. The milking parlor was in pretty good shape, but we had to replace the actual cinder blocks were in pretty good shape, but we had to replace the roof, and we insulated and turned that into a useful building. There were no utilities out there that were functional, so we found a well and we renovated the well to make it functional. We got electric service, we got internet service, so all of this has happened through a lot of effort on the part of individuals involved with this initiative, with very important support from the university in specific ways, and also Mary Hendricks, the president, has been a very big supporter of our initiatives out there.
Yeah, I'm Garland McCoy, by the way.
Garland. Hi.
Correspondent.
Mhm.
I'm glad you got your proposal approved. We're precision ag work, specifically at the current time, calibrating, validating the network infrastructure, because it's primarily audited at the present time, with the hope that we can steer more of the BEAD money to the very end of the served community, which would be our agriculture community. It sort of has to get past the fiber first crowd in the urban, suburban, and then get out there. But I think it's going to be worthwhile, because I see a lot of upside to the adoption of precision ag. And I was wondering, for example, you said you've got internet access, what that infrastructure looks like, and what plans you might have for the beginning of field testing, some work up on some applications in the area of precision ag, which is is pretty robust and large. So you can take little segments of it, you build it out.
Yeah. So the question, I bet the people on Zoom probably can't hear these questions. I don't know if these microphones are tied in, but I think from here on out, I'll come and bring you a microphone, and we'll let the people in the audience use the microphones. But this question was about the internet infrastructure at the farm, how we're using it, and how it might be used for precision agriculture. So I'll start, and then I'll open up to you all to add in. It's nothing fancy. Currently, we're connected up through the local cable company, Comcast, and it's about 20 or 40 megabit per second connection. The network itself, I built it. I chose the routers and the access points and all that stuff, even to the point of pulling the cable through conduits we put in the ground and terminating the ends with the connectors, so I use the company Ubiquity for all of our access points because they're low cost, but my experience is it's worked really well. The only time the internet goes down is when the power goes out, and then the power comes back on. most I've ever had to do was to reset a GFC receptacle that got tripped. But I'll ask these individuals how they've used the internet out there. How have you used it so far?
I would say the biggest benefit that actually just happened this past week is so if it wasn't obvious, the main thing we do there is grow vegetables, and vegetables require storage. As soon as they're harvested, they are perishable, and so you need to keep them at a cold temperature basically until they move away from the farm out to the market. And so we just, we're still in the process of finishing it, but we just set up our first cold storage unit at the farm using a kind of hack system that makes refrigeration really affordable to farmers, because you basically just put in a window unit air conditioner, and there's this little mechanism called a CoolBot. It's a company that tricks the AC unit to going down to refrigerator temperatures. And so we installed that, and it has a Wi-Fi connectivity option that allows us to monitor it when we're not there, which especially because this is a university farm, it's not like my personal family farm, that allows me to monitor the temperature of the storage while I'm not there, which is really important for food spoilage. And beyond that, something else we envision is some kind of monitoring system for our high tunnel to be able to turn water on and off so that we could turn on the irrigation system from our house or from wherever we are, or also to open and close our sides, open and close. And we could set that all up to be able to be on command through your cell phone. So that would be the biggest uses that I've found so far.
Which can all be really helpful to farmers, and so demonstrating that. And then education. We're a university farm, students are out there, and being able to have classes out there. We showed the pavilion. I have all of my classes end up going out there at some point, and it's important to have that connectivity and to be able to broadcast doing special workshops and things like that from the farm in the future.
How far away is it? So I'm familiar with Shepherd's College, sort of downtown Martinsburg. Is that very far outside of town, or?
You mean downtown Shepherdstown?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes,
Okay.
yeah, I'm sorry. Pardon.
Yeah, it's about a mile.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very close. There's actually, it's almost contiguous with the rest of university property. There's probably about 400 feet. Yeah, I'll use British units. 400 feet of privately owned land between Shepherd's West Campus and the Tabler Farm property. So by road, it's about a mile to get from main campus to the main entrance of the farm.
I'm definitely hoping eventually that could be a bike or a footpath, and get more and more students out there, whether they're involved in sustainable agriculture or not. Honestly, a big part is trying to pull more people in from different departments, those that aren't specifically going to go into ag, but to know where your food comes from, know the importance of it, know all that goes into that, and getting more students involved. I think it helps a lot with student retention. Student farms on college campuses are becoming more and more popular, and for good reason.
For me, as the community engagement coordinator, having access to the internet definitely makes it so that I can be in the farm real time communicating with the organizations we work with, like Shepherdstown Shares. They give us a grant and we give them food, and we work with West Virginia University. So we can have meetings in real time at the farm with what we have to give to the community, creating situations where I can make recipe plans for the community so people are aware of how to use the produce. So Madison spends a certain time between the campus and the farm, whereas I am majority at the farm unless I'm at one of our partner sites. So having that internet there has been really helpful for my position with AmeriCorp.
And I do have plans to do some more sophisticated things with sensors, embedded in the environment out there. I am happy to say that my second term as chair of our department will be ending soon. And that means I will hopefully have more time to actually do the fun stuff that got me into academics to begin with. I have last summer I had a small grant to develop a microcontroller based hardware wallet to store safely the private keys for interacting with a blockchain. That was the first step. My real goal was to develop the technology so that you could have these really low cost yet secure autonomous devices that can interact autonomously with blockchains. And so there's some more sophisticated things we can do with the connectivity out there, but the benefits of just being connected, as they've all said, go
Well, securing the food commodity supply chain is critically important, and blockchain is a potential tool for that. Your supply chain is only secure as your edge. So to the extent to which that edge now becomes the sensors and the wireless, probably overwhelmingly wireless network that's going to interface with that. Nobody's going to put fiber out on the field. So that's going to be very important. You have to drive it, take it from the endpoint, drive it all the way home. A lot of stuff going on. The other thing is, I think I mentioned you exchange is finding a good place that's not within striking distance. You can bring congressional staff, folks of the various agencies, out. It's striking distance for them to get out and have a couple of hours out, kick the tires, a little show and tell type of thing, a little educational thing, and then take them back. It's you have to, when I take them out to the data centers out there around Dulles Airport for tours, Equinix Global Peering Center, blah blah blah. You have to be mindful of how far you can stretch their day, their time, and what to work with. And so you sort of start going a circumference around that. You could get up there and hold it for a couple of hours and take them back. Give them a couple of beers there at the Bavarian Inn, send them on their way. You'd have something that's important to bring that community into it. The people that are G.T. Thompson and his into that environment, right? Show them the next level.
It seems,
Thomas.
It seems like my impression is a zeitgeist of the current moment in regenerative ag is regenerative agriculture. There's a fantastic movie called Kiss the Ground that really brings the focus on the importance of the health of the soil. And I'm curious on two fronts, like obviously the healthier your soil, the better the food quality, which is important for, to maximize the amount of nutrition out of the ground. But also I'm curious if there's anything like, what is your guys' view around that, just in terms of like focus on and even maybe quantification of health of the soil, both in terms of production, but also another aspect that's interesting is carbon credits. There's increasingly this idea of somehow quantifying the health of the soil or in terms of carbon sequestration. I'm just curious about your guys' experience or view of that.
So the question was about the health of soil regeneration, and quantifying dimensions of soil health, such as carbon sequestration. And who wants to take this one?
I'll take that one. Thanks. Appreciate the question. Absolutely. Kiss the Ground, great movie, documentary showing a lot of the benefits there. Unfortunately, Paul Wimmuth, who was going to be here on the panel, he's focusing on regenerative agriculture, putting in more diversity of cover crops. the more that we can build up the carbon in the soil, then the better things are going to be. And there's a variety of ways to do that. And that's why I love ag, is because there's a lot of problems, but there's so many solutions, and especially around climate change. Part of the research I've done as well and look forward to continuing with is around biochar, which is basically charcoal, but with the purpose of adding that into the soil. And it's a much more stable form of carbon that can help a lot with nutrient and water retention. And there's carbon markets specifically associated with biochar and how we can quantify that, but needing to have the real numbers. So that's just one example of something that's quite complicated. With biochar, it's going to depend on what you make it out of, what's your starting carbon-based feedstock, how exactly you produce it. Are you treating it at all before you put it into the soil? What kind of soil environment do you have? So there's all of these factors, which for one thing shows that we need to have these locally applicable solutions and know how it's going to work in, the area of Jefferson County where we are. And that might be different than others. And so the more we tie research together as well, and looking at these solutions and the quantification for the carbon markets that you talked about. But the more that you can store that carbon in the soil, you're helping pull carbon out of the atmosphere. So helping with the drawdown to begin with. And then you're also, by adding in that carbon, particularly the water retention. If you have drought years, those that have been working on increasing their soil organic matter versus a neighbor that hasn't, you will see a very noticeable difference. There's noticeable differences in yield and also nutritive quality of the food coming off if you focus on building the soil. So with sustainable or regenerative agriculture, it's not so much about the crop, it's about the soil. You have to start at the base, and it's going to make everything so much better. And just the cascading benefits that are going to stem from that.
And I would add that a benefit that Shepherd University's Tabler Farm is adding to this really big important question when it comes to agriculture is how do you apply that and how do you share that knowledge to the people who are actually doing the work? Because it's really easy to talk about the problems of agriculture. It's a lot harder to actually work on the problems of agriculture. And so because we are a demonstration farm and we have a 1/4 acre of production in intensive vegetables, that's a pretty common scale for small growers. And so we can, apply these soil building practices and kind of figure out how to do it in our region and then share that knowledge with the farmers around us.
And with that, it's a demonstration site. So we're saying, all right, this is how our soil tests have been changing over time based upon the practices that we've been doing. So for example, those cover crops that we just put in, we have a soil test that we just did, and then we're going to continue to do those tests and see how our soil biology has been coming back more and building up that soil organic matter and those nutrients. And if you demonstrate it, then people see it and you might start to see those shifts. I mentioned again, Paul, where he had brothers that are ranchers and he's coming and saying, I want to do rotational grazing where it's mob grazing. You have a lot of animals in one small paddock and you move them very frequently and it helps build up the organic matter. And it's a different way than just putting animals out on pasture, and they tend to kind of beat it up a little bit more. And his brothers that have been doing it said, I'm not going to do that. But seeing it, the more people see it and see the benefits, the more they can believe it, and the more students are out there and seeing these and our engagement with the community, then hopefully you can start to see those changes and more people adapting these types of practices if we have the quantification and the research to back it up for our region.
Yeah.
I know that you all are working on small farms, and I'm from Colorado where we have a lot of small farms, but we also have big ag. How do your programs intersect with the big ag where everybody's buying up all the property and then doing whatever they're doing, and then huge crops as opposed to the kind of sustainable farming you guys are talking about? What's that intersection looking?
Yes, so the question was about sort of compare and contrast what we do with big ag and how we intersect with big ag. And who wants to take a swing?
there's room in agriculture for everybody. There's always going to be the field crops. Our focus has been specifically on more small scale intensive vegetable and perennial production with our orchard and some small fruits as well. But there are plenty of so much acreage of our main staples of corn, wheat, and soy. But how can those be done more effectively and with regenerative practices as well? So that's where we're looking into the future with, it's a pretty new program, but looking into the other acreage that we have and to demonstrate that for field crops potentially. We have limited amount of bandwidth, use that term, for our institutional capacity and the people that are working at the farm right now, but definitely looking into that in the future and incorporation of more livestock. We ever get the agrivoltaics off the grounds and a lot of those types of things to be a demonstration site for a lot of those different types of agriculture.
I just wanted to say, right now, under 35, they do not make up the majority of farmers. Most of our farmers are over the age of 35, and we have a significant number of farmers over 65. And the over 65 crowd are typically the large scale farmers. Well, our under 35 crowd has a lot of student loan debt. They can't afford to buy these big acreages of farms, and a lot of them are not inheriting them either. So if we want a younger crowd of farmers, the most affordable type of land will be that small scale farming. So I think, I'm not saying that the large agriculture system is going to fade out, but I think we're going to start to see a lot more small acre farms because that is what is affordable to the next generation of farmers. And these are going to be the people who are innovative in technology because they have to learn how they can grow a significant amount of bioregional food in a small space. That's it.
What I noticed, a lot of people that I grew up with that were farmers, the younger ones went off to be accountants somewhere in the city with stable jobs and, you know, good insurance and stuff, and didn't want to do the farm because it's tough. And she's right, the bigger farms are disappearing, and the future of community ag is small farms.
And that's particularly true in Berkeley and Jefferson counties where we are, and where there's a lot of opportunity where if you're coming into it as a beginning farmer, purchasing land is difficult. A lot of farms are getting broken up and sold off for development instead. And Midwest, they got a lot of acreage for those field crops. And not to say that field crops aren't still going to be in this area also. But when we're talking about localized food systems, a lot of what we're talking about is, you know, the produce that you're going to see, that, you know, the fruits and the vegetables, and where we can increase that. But looking at some statistics specific for Berkeley County, for example, about 30% of the farms are just 1 to 9 acres, and 56% of the farms, the farm value of sales is less than $2,500. So there's a lot of small scale. There's unfortunately a lot of where you have farmers that also have a job off the farm in order to be a farmer. But however much we can, you know, increase the entry, especially as we do have a lot of aging farmers and so much of people that have moved off the farm and went into other jobs in the city, for example, that has historically been a trend. The new trend is more people that don't have the background that are getting into agriculture. So they need more the education side. They don't have the land. And the incubator farm that we are setting up, you know, new things are happening constantly at Tabler Farm, which is really exciting. But the incubator, to give that access to land, decrease that particular barrier to entry, as well as the big equipment that you would need. Well, big and small equipment, and the knowledge sharing amongst new farmers, and what you gain out of watching the neighbor on the plot next to you and what they're doing, and they're learning from you, and you can work cooperatively in trying to market things. So that's a really nice avenue that we're heading in order to have that knowledge sharing and decrease that barrier to entry. And people can work on their marketing plans. So you stay at an incubator farm site for a certain period of time, you hone your skill for growing, and you work on that marketing plan. Then maybe if you go to a bank, you can get a loan, and then you can get the land and the equipment. You can get some of these government loans as well for getting into agriculture, but they want you to have experience. There's, of course, jobs that you can have working on other farms, but you learn a lot by working on your own, and working on that business plan. So that way, when you move off the incubator and start your own farm, you're not starting from scratch. You have your business name, people know it. You've been working with customers, whatever that marketing strategy might be. If you're doing community supported agriculture or CSA, direct, wholesale to restaurants, wholesale to other retailers, farmers markets, whatever the case might be that you've established. And then hopefully when you have new farmers entering in, they will succeed.
Nice. Before we take the next question, we would like to talk about, our title is Resilient Food Systems, Building Regional Sustainable Cooperative Food Networks. So I'd like to give the opportunity of our panelists to talk more about that community connection. And I thought a good place to start this would be with Todd, who shared an anecdote about his experience during the COVID, the peak of the COVID shutdown. And his experience at Bushel and Peck.
Well, I've been in this this is my 13th year involved in this, and we started our Bushel and Peck store about 5.5 years ago, and we didn't have a clue on what we were doing. But we decided to do it anyway. So one thing I noticed is like, during the beginning of the pandemic, remember everybody went out and just bought stuff and there was nothing in the grocery stores. And this is something I've been talking about for years for people, but we did. We never closed. In the first 6 months of the pandemic, there was only 2 of us working there. We worked like all day, every day, 7 days a week just to stay, stocked up. Because we could go out to the farm. We had volunteers. If we didn't have it, we sent somebody out to the farm to bring it in. Or I would go out early in the morning or late or after we closed or whatever on the weekends. And we had stuff that they didn't, when they didn't. This also happened when the recent egg crisis, everybody know about that? Well, once that hit, we had a lot of people coming in to our store buying 6, 7, 8, 10 dozen eggs at a time, wiping us out, selling more eggs in one afternoon than I usually sell in a week. And then leaving my shelves empty. The problem is with both of those scenarios, and it's happened a couple other with smaller national crises, is that we were there. The community was there. The farming community was there for the community. But when the crisis was over, they went back to the store and left us. I had to drive out and get eggs, to fill up my store. And because when you do local, you can't just, snap your fingers and have eggs up here. It's not a corporation. You can't just call a truck. And that's part of the thing. And what we need people to do is to keep doing that. If we could retain half those people, and that's part of the problem we have with this local food, is when there's a crisis, we're there for you. These farmers have always been there for you. But as soon as it's over, the customer disappears. And I think a lot of that has to do with ease. It's comfort. If you've ever been through a food crisis, a real food crisis, then it's going to happen at some point. It's just inevitable that it happens everywhere. But the more you know where your food comes from locally, and treat the local people nicely, so it's kind of frustrating in what we do sometimes.
Well, I'm kind of curious. You mentioned you're from Southeast DC. I mean, and there's areas in the Bay Area that are food deserts.
Yes.
I mean, so what's your proposal of bridging that gap between, the sustainable farming and eliminating or reducing the food desert?
Yeah, I can talk to that. So I'm 31 years old. I grew up in DC in the 90s. There was For the longest time in Ward 8, we had one grocery store. When I was in high school, we got our second grocery store. And now in my 30s, they got their third grocery store. So that has been very interesting. I think Shepherd is in a great place. We are an hour and a half from DC. We're an hour and a half from Baltimore. We're 3 hours from Pittsburgh. We are super close to so many major cities that have areas where there's just a lack of food. So we have people in these areas who want to have sustainable food for their communities. And I think Shepherd can be that bridge. Right now, only 1% of US farmers are Black, and Black people make up 14% of the population. 1%. I looked at the statistics of farmers within 2 hours of here. They're like less than like 50. The Latinx community makes up, they're the biggest minority in the country. They make up 7% of farming. And these are farm owners, not workers. The Asian community makes up 1% of the farmers. The overwhelming majority is white farmers, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when it comes to access to healthy foods for communities of color, there's no representation. So when we have these panels and discussions about sustainability and farming, our traditional foods are left out. Black-eyed peas are a traditional Black food that is very nutritious, very good for the soil, but nobody's growing black-eyed peas. You're going to farmers market, we don't have okra, we don't have, for the Puerto Rican community, we don't have collards, we don't have gandules for the Puerto Rican community. And there's a huge Puerto Rican community in the DC area and in Pennsylvania. And there was a farmer who made a northern climate adopted pigeon pea. I'm actually growing that this year. So there are people doing the research. They don't necessarily always have the backing of the universities. So they're being extra innovative because they're working with lack of resources. I saw in Baltimore, there are people who are asking the community to grow a seed so that they can have a bioregionally adopted seed for that community. And this is the incubator farm will be a great place for, like Dr. Comer said, to have that education, have that land to grow the things that your community traditionally eats, and to bring employment to your community, to bring food into your communities. I know there are some urban farms in DC and other places, but I'm a little biased. I don't think urban farms are a long-term solution, especially with so many water crises happening in cities. I think more rural farming with more communal farming with cooperation between rural and city is the future. Right now, I don't feel like the rural and the city communities are in great conversations, not just in the East Coast, but nationwide. And that's something that, as a community engagement person, we should be working on bridging that gap. I don't know if anybody else.
I would like to add that when we're talking about agriculture, it's important to differentiate what type of agriculture that we're talking about, because a large portion of agriculture in the US and also now globally is commodity crop based, which is basically you're growing some kind of crop that has a value on the global market, whereas the kind of farming we are referring to is predominantly specialty crop, which is what it is categorized as by the USDA, which refers to fruit, vegetables, trees, nurseries, greenhouse production, anything that is basically not intended for the global market. And that's really important because these, so-called specialty crops is the real food that's going directly to people, whereas commodity crops some of them are gonna be put into a market to be made into food, but there's many purposes to them. Whereas when we're, talking about small scale vegetable growers, they're selling directly to consumers rather than tapping into a larger global economic system.
in some of our area and with the topography, it's a lot more conducive to the vegetable and fruit production and orchards. And that's where a lot of that is within our area. In fact, for fruit, tree nuts and berries for Jefferson County, it's the #1 county in the country and ranks very high up there in terms of any other counties in the whole United States. So you have to be regionally specific with a lot of these things and think about the market and where those population centers are. But I think there's room for a variety. So just give a little pushback to what you said. There definitely needs to be more of that connect because it's easier to grow in the rural areas. That's where you have so much more of the land. But we need to combat the food deserts in a variety of ways, growing on rooftops. You need the structural integrity of the buildings, but there's a lot of potential for growing a lot of food on roofs. And then depending on what urban centers you're talking about, vacant lots and areas where it's underutilized land, then there's potential there. I came from Lansing, Michigan. That's where I was the last 10 years. There's a lot of urban agriculture and it's vibrant and amazing. And like large local food system that's based around that. And sometimes it's people that are piecing together 6 different city lots within a neighborhood and they're making it work and they're making it work very effectively. So there can be a combination of things.
Vertical growing too, I think is going to be big.
But that's like pretty small scale.
Yeah.
There. You're gonna grow enough to actually sustain human
Million
populations. We need
people.
larger scale.
So that's where, you know, the combination of all those different scales, but having it there in a city from the education standpoint too, of people in a neighborhood seeing, okay, that's what a potato plant looks like. You know, that's how food is actually grown.
Yeah, no, I agree. We do need urban plots, but typically cities, when the communities of color lead those, cities will start to change ordinance about those things, or some cities think that it brings in pests and bugs and things like that. So there are barriers to that in a way that you would not have those barriers in a rural setting. I just mean because of like, we're just so close to so many major city hubs that there's no reason why some of that acreage could not be used to kind of like a CSA model of growing. And I do think education is very important, and those are great demonstrations. But I mean, they're just not going to feed the amount of people that need to be fed, and they won't always support. Like, yes, greens are great, but how many potatoes can you really grow for that community with an urban spot? And yeah, some older buildings are just don't, so, you know, they have that angle, that structural integrity, they just don't support that rooftop. Maybe some of the newer buildings, DC, but those older buildings, I don't think they were designed to put anything on the rooftop.
Also, the environmental toxins in urban areas, like the soil quality, I wonder, this is not an area that I've researched, but that's something that I would question is what is the soil like and the air quality there like?
But possible to also kind of reclaim brownfield sites. I've seen that a lot in Detroit. There's also a lot of urban ag in Detroit. And
There's a lot of that in our area too. But I think one of the just as important thing is us learning how to grow things is the education of the consumer. This is a problem that I run into all the time because like the crops you're talking about, we've carried those. And when I was growing up, those things were just everywhere. Now they're called specialty crops, but when I was a kid, they were just what everybody had in their gardens. And one of the things that always amazes me is people come up and ask me, well, we get these, you know, kind of weird, one of my growers will say, I have this weird thing, you know, do you want to sell it? And say, yeah, sure, take it, see what happens. Stick it out there. And people ask me, what do you do with this thing? Right? And I'm just like, I don't know. YouTube, you know? And then for me, I'm not a cook, but I take it home, cut it up, saute it, bake it, you know. To me, it's just natural to go cook it, or I'll try it raw just to see if I can handle it, you know. But what I found is, and I call it corporate conditioning, is that we've conditioned our society to not cook, to not understand the idea of cooking. And one of the problems I have with we have at the farmers market is people come in, particularly like 10 years ago when our market was kind of new to all this stuff, is they didn't know what to do with this stuff. So we would have, you know, just these special classes or just stand there and just talk to people of, you know, don't be afraid to buy a vegetable just because you don't know what it looks like, or if you've never seen it before, but it has a spot on it or something, you know, and people overcoming that. If we can get this community or consumers to overcome that, these small farms will just boom.
Two things. You can remediate soil. You can pull lead out of soil with their plants that you can use. Sunflowers are a great way pulling heavy metals out of soil. They've done studies on it. You dispose of them at toxic waste sites. You would do soil testing to watch that the heavy mineral, the decrease in heavy minerals. So there are people doing that kind of research. And two, that is what you talked about, not knowing what to do with produce. That is one of the reasons I'm at Tabler. So if it's okay, I can take kale right now. It's not a very popular thing at Shepherdstown Share. They're like, people don't want it. They love the spinach. They'll eat the lettuce, but they don't want the kale. So my kind of responsibility right now is how do I get people to engage with kale? How do I recognize the limited amount of time people have to cook? And then how do I come up with recipes that people can have? So I'm working with the community to make recipes, demonstrate recipes, and hand that out so that people want to eat those produce. And then from our side, as farmers, we should know what our consumers want, because when I was talking with the food pantry, people don't have access to clean water. Like, we don't think about that as a farmer. We have all the access to water. We have water wells. Well, now from my side, should I be triple washing my produce? How do I recognize that people maybe a soup isn't the best dish to tell people to make with kale? You know, there's a lot of things that we as farmers are unfortunately going to have to be innovative on if we want the consumers to want our products.
And at the university setting, however much we can be linking in, you know, people are pretty impressionable when they're younger, especially, and they've just left home. They're that 18 to 22 range. A lot of the students, certainly not all. We're a relatively small campus, but how many of the students can we get through to? So we're working on our partnerships with Aramark that does the food on campus, and they have a chef's table. So working with them, say, all right, what about these vegetables that students aren't as familiar with, to make them become familiar, show them how to cook it, and think from that perspective too, those that don't necessarily have kitchens. Well, what fresh produce could they do things with limited resources for that? But the more you expose them and to these things, then certainly the better chance that they're ever going to buy it. Because if they have no idea what to do, then they're not going to. And that's a lot with community supported agriculture too. At least a lot of the farmers that I know that have CSA models, normally every week they'll have a little newsletter. It'll talk about what you're going to get in your box. And here's at least one recipe to do with some of the vegetables that are coming in your box this week. So that education side being really very important.
It's one of the things that really amazed me when I got into this, 13 years ago, growing up around farms and stuff, that I think our second year in market, we worked with this backpack program for schools for kids, where we, you put food in the backpack for the kids. And what we learned with dealing with that, which I didn't know, is most people don't even have stoves. They have microwaves. And, I guess it was like the year after I had my house appraised, and they didn't care about my stove, but they cared about my microwave. And that just was amazing to me, that people don't know how to turn on a stove. And how do you cook kale in a microwave? I have no clue, because I would cook it on the stove, right?
The new generation is they're the air fryer generation. So really, it's like, how do you cook kale in the air fryer? That's like what the kids are with right now. You have to keep up with the technology and know what the young population is.
Let's take another question from the audience. Actually, before we do that, I wanted to, you mentioned the pantry, Shepherdstown Shares, which connects with your question, Aaron. I don't think that Jefferson County or Berkeley County have many, if any, census tracts that are designated food deserts by the USDA. But it doesn't matter where you are, there's going to be people who have food insecurity. And one of the things that we've done with produce from the farm is get it to Shepherdstown Shares, which is this local group that has a food pantry. And I'm really proud of that. I think that's one of the coolest things that we've done. So let's take another question. Did you have a question? I think your hand was up earlier.
Oh, I
You
was
forgot it.
snapping for go green.
Oh, all right. Let's take.
Yeah, admittedly, not an area I know much about. Appreciate the education here. National Intelligence Council produced a report on climate impacts to national security about 2 years ago. And they said that food insecurity is an exacerbating factor. It's going to have a huge impact on destabilizing governments. It's a big problem for us, right? So on food insecurity, which is going to segue here, is there an opportunity or demand for a response to, say, disasters, where maybe you could introduce a crop that's high growth rate, high yield, high calorie, or is that just unheard of?
Are you more so talking about in other countries?
So I think we start here, but obviously globally is where the response would be needed.
So for one thing, diversification is often key. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Grow a variety of different things, have crop rotation, so that way you're feeding the soil in that way. But if something is not going to be adapted to certain crises that happen with climate change or specific climatic events, then maybe it doesn't wipe everything out. So having that diversity is really important. Look like you were gonna.
Yeah, and I think rather than waiting for the disaster to happen and then doing something afterwards, how can we help to prevent the disaster from becoming a disaster in the first place? And I think we need heavy investing into the kind of agriculture that we are trying to do at Tabler, which is the smaller scale, localized systems, because right now, most funding and resources goes to commodity crops. Particularly government subsidies only go to commodity agriculture. Specialty crops don't receive any government subsidies at all. And that's the real food for the people. And so
Particularly in a crisis.
sorry?
Particularly in a crisis.
Exactly. So when an area is destabilized and there's not already a local food system there, then, and they're solely relying on the grocery stores, which is relying on the global market to supply their food, and that's no longer available. Well, that's when, you know, a lot of suffering happens. And so within the US, we could build stronger local food systems, but globally, we've done so much, not we specifically, but there has been so much intervention into local economies, trying to get them into the global economy, that you're taking away the resiliency of those communities and those foodways that have been existed there for thousands of years. So it's like we have the climate crisis, but we also already had a crisis of like taking away from local sustainable. And when I say sustainable in this context, it just means that like it was able to literally sustain that area. It's food.
So I think, yeah, looking at that localized production as opposed to food aid that gets shipped in that destabilizes a food system. But yeah, goal number 2 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals for 2030 is about no hunger. And how do we work to try to achieve that?
Yeah, if you do any kind of emergency management training, which I did years ago, you learn that the local store group, Martin's and those kind of things, if something were to happen, they have 3 days worth of food for you. But your local folks have food all the time. So if you're looking at, you know, some kind of crisis like that, local is the way to save your community in a crisis. And also you can use these kind of crops to stabilize riverbanks and things like, there are techniques to do farming in such a way that you can help the entire environment.
And I think building that local food system would have the ripple effect to have less destabilizing agricultural practices. Because, for instance, right now, agriculture is in the US is responsible for 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Well, when you look into like what areas of agriculture is causing that, it's going to be your large scale monoculture, commodity crop, livestock based, like that are doing really intensive practices, but with really poor practices when it comes to soil health.
Yeah.
I think Tania wants to
Okay.
make a comment, right?
Yeah, so I'm new to West Virginia. I'm new to the Appalachian region. But I've been researching local foodways, and they have a dish called soup beans, and it is a bean dish that has a little bit of meat in it, and you eat it with cornbread, and it has gotten people through tough times. And it's, from my understanding, like a Sunday dinner kind of situation. So there's already resilient food dishes in these communities. But if we're taking away people's ability to grow those things, then we lose that like resiliency. And just in my household in general, during the pandemic, when things were like not on the grocery shelves, you know what was? Beans. If you ate beans, if you went right there, beans are like $2. And there is chickpeas, there are pinto beans, black, whatever. All of that was there. And we never once were like, we have no food during the pandemic. I'm just gonna throw that out there. Beans is the way to survive.
Here.
That's one of the things that makes me, because once the pandemic hit, for the first month, I had no time. We were in the store, 24/7 pretty much. I lived 2 blocks from our stores, so I was home that was it. And when I finally went into like Martin's, you're right, there was only beans and things like that. And I walked around the stores like, they didn't buy anything that you could survive on. All the survival food is still here. It was just amazing to me that the general population did not know how to survive. And I said, well, thank you, because now I have all the survival food for me. But
Let's end with a question from Zoom. And for the record, I have lots of beans in my survival stash at my house, just in case.
Or did you just keep them in your stash?
We rotate them through. Yeah.
They are a food that grows, like, so you can put them in the ground too. So,
Not if they're canned.
So
sorry, right.
we got a couple of questions. Sylvia, I'll have to answer your question. I'll answer your question when I see you in person next time about my bees at the farm. But we got a question from Julia, a Shepherd student. My daughters and I enjoy visiting Bushel and Peck in Charlestown, and we're thankful to have such a wonderful resource for locally sourced foods. My question is, with an uptick in interest in these smaller homestead farms, do any of you see a downside to the influx of so many new residents coming from other states to Jefferson County and what seems like quick sales of large plots of land for new housing developments? And how do we manage growth sustainably? So let's answer this question, and this will be our last one.
I would say that those are 2 different things that are happening in terms of the smaller homestead farms. I don't think that's our issue in Jefferson County. I think we need more of those, but that's not where most land is being sold to. It's being sold to developers who are putting up neighborhoods that are not sustainably minded. I mean, perhaps maybe they use like double pane windows and things like that, but basically they're taking a large piece of land that was once a farm and they're putting hundreds of homes on it, which is causing a huge influx, will eventually cause a huge influx of population to the area.
So there's people that you could sell to as a farmer, but it's going to increase the cost of the land and increase then that barrier to entry, especially for new farmers.
Yeah, land cost is rising really rapidly in Jefferson County. It's the wealthiest county in West Virginia. It's also the most expensive to live in.
One thing I noticed over the last particularly 6 or months or a year is like a lot of my customers at the Bushel Pack are newbies. They come into the community and they're looking for stores like us. They're actually better customers than and more educated in that kind of thing because they're coming from the cities where they had that kind of store anyway. So, it's good and bad, I guess.
And I'll say, Todd, I'm glad we had you from the retail side and the sourcing side, but there is room in the food system for lots of people. We need growers, we need more processors, we need those doing value added, we need the butchers, but yeah, the processing for animals. There's normally a huge line for any kind of smaller scale ag. There is room for everybody. If you don't have the green thumb, everybody eats, and there's a lot of possibilities within the food system to make a more resilient food system.
I just want to say that during the 2020 census, West Virginia lost population. I think they were one of like 2 states that lost population. So from a statewide point, West Virginia is going to develop a problem of not having enough workers. So I can't speak for Jefferson County in general, but I think that Tabler can maybe help people see the value in West Virginia, in growing West Virginia, sustaining West Virginia, and maybe Jefferson County may not be their forever home, but other counties in West Virginia may be their forever home.
I would also say that I think the important thing when you have an area that is susceptible to population change is to not lose the population that was already there. Don't let them fall through the cracks. And so for the West Virginians who have been in Jefferson County for generations, they are still just as important and have a voice that needs to be heard. But that doesn't mean that, we should close our doors and not allow anyone else to move in. We can have space for more people, but we just need to make sure that the needs of the people and the voices of the people who are already there are being heard.
With that, we have to wrap it up and make room for the next panels to come in.
We're going to switch over and to the next panel. I want to thank our guests from West Virginia. I guess the question I'll throw out to be thought of for the next time, and I said I'm very encouraging of Tabor Farm on my 2 visits, but I've yet to get an answer about the long-term business model to make Tabor Farm itself sustainable. And I always hear about these grants, and when I talk to Ben Martz, who's the dean of the business school, everything's grant-driven. But the world I come in, you got to have a 5-year vision and some kind of revenue generation and some kind of sustainability. And I'm not hearing it. So we'll regroup on that.
Say one little bit.
Please.
So much of the education side on farms, on college campuses, it's harder to quantify, but the more you can have attracting students and retaining students and incorporating that into all sorts of aspects of their education, then you do have those dollars coming in from tuition dollars, and you need to make sure that it's then supporting those programs that are attracting them.
That's encouraging to hear. So thank you very much.
Thank you guys. I had to resonate with your comment about consumers.